Hi, and thanks everyone for joining us in this talk where we're going to talk about autonomy and if it's what we really want or what we really want. Maybe it's becoming...
Yeah, I hope it's not hard.
See,
I was having this whole performance. Yeah.
See,
now I need to stop it.
See, this is why we won't make it as full-time performers, I think. But this was the first time we tried
to come
this.
back.
Yeah. But we're going to talk about autonomy and if it's what we really want. And when we were preparing for this talk, well, we were talking about the concept of autonomy also outside of our professional worlds. And the time when I felt most autonomous probably was this. I bought my first house by myself and it felt really autonomous, especially on the picture on the right. That felt really good. And I felt really autonomous. I thought, this is my project. I can make all of the decisions. This is my thing, and that feels really good. Little did I know when I was in that high that there were going to be a lot of frustrations and setbacks and overwhelming feelings, and a lot of times where I was thinking and actually saying, can someone please take all of these decisions for me, because I'm done. Tell me what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and I will do it. So this is also where I realized that this whole thing of autonomy always exists within boundaries, and it exists within a specific context. It's never just fully autonomous. There's always this polarity that you're managing.
You're forgetting your dictator.
My cat, yeah, he was not happy with the move, but that's another story. And when we were talking about autonomy, obviously this came up too, because we're all conditioned in a similar way that whenever someone says autonomy, there's someone who's saying drive. But this also is another definition of autonomy, and it also says that autonomy exists within boundaries. In this case, when you want to create intrinsically motivated teams, whatever that may be exactly, you have to focus on mastery, purpose, and autonomy. And this is the same thing that we say about socio-technical systems, right? You cannot just focus on the technical part or on the social part or on the cognitive part. Everything influences each other. So technical choices have social consequences and the other way around. So you have to focus on everything, and it's within boundaries. Another thing that we were discussing, and I apologize for this slide because this is a horrible slide if you have OCD, but like me, and I created this slide, so what does that say about me? I'm not really sure, but autonomy also can become compulsive within organizations. I've been in organizations where autonomy became a goal in itself. We need to get autonomous teams. We need to increase autonomy because that will bring us to whatever star that they were thinking that it was going to bring them. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. And the thing here with this concept of autonomy, and especially for me, as a social scientist, I get triggered by words like autonomy or taking ownership or transparency and other container concepts. This meme was still from the time that B&B Voorliefde was happening, but this is like my go-to meme for words like this. Because autonomy is nothing more than a container concept that we use as we please. And there's so much room for interpretation and misinterpretation that it will go wrong if we don't specify it. And autonomy means that we need to specify the boundaries in which it exists, the context in which it exists, because autonomy it cannot be defined for an entire organization. You have different contexts and levels in your organization, and you all have to define it for all of these different contexts. If I now tell Kenny, hey, Kenny, be autonomous, or do something that's autonomous, that can become that's a problem, right? Because I have a different interpretation from the word than he does. So if you don't specify that, if you don't specify the boundaries, the context, what it means in terms of behavior, decision-making, power structures, all of these things, in all of these different contexts and on all of these different levels, then I think it will go wrong. And this is what we're going to talk about in this talk, autonomy on different levels, because it exists in code, between teams, within teams, in the organization, and that's what we want to talk about today.
Yeah.
But before that,
so
another definition.
I'm a little bit aligned here with Jay Bloom, who talks about autonomy, and I think it's also very individuating, right? I make up my own rules. If you look up the dictionary, it actually says it's self-governing. Are we in an organization? Who thinks it's okay as a team in an organization to be self-governing? You can do whatever you want. Less people that stood up this morning aiming for self-organization, right? And it's true, because autonomy for me is one side of the polarity. And this is a polarity map, and people who understand polarities, they're both sides of the same coin, and they both have like as you can see from the top, like autonomy has uniqueness. It's great. We can create new unique things. That's the positive side of autonomy. Then you have isolation. Autonomous teams get isolated if the longer they stay isolated, right? If they don't interact, that's what team topology also tries to do, right? Interact with each other, they will go into isolation. That's the downside. On the other hand, if you have the other side, it's the very connectedness, right? Less self-governing, which is heteronomy. And that's, you're no longer self-governing, but there's connectiveness. Problem is, downside is sameness. What we want to do and what a polarity map is, and there's a great book about polarity mapping, is we can map these out, and in each level today we're going to take you through the map and what's actually going on, and hope you can start mapping these two sides yourself and find a way to stay at the uniqueness and connectiveness. Yeah, so both sides of the coin. That's what we're going to get into, and we're going to go into code, then we're going to go within teams, between teams, and organizational. That's the levels we're going to start with. So I'm going to start right now in code. Autonomy in code, because I am an engineer. I started as a software engineer 14 years ago, and I hear a lot of people talk about no silver bullets and golden hammers. So when I started out, I was a Java engineer. I had this unit test, or a piece of code, and I was told from the day one, for one class, you write one single unit test. As software engineer, who's been told that? Each Java class write one unit. Yes, exactly. However, the problem is that if I change one of these, what will happen? Cascading effects. This is what I'm dealing with, right? I change one class, then it cascaded to all these different unit tests, and I needed to start changing these unit tests. So there's this great book called Working Effectively with Unit Tests by Jay Field, and Martin Fowler talked about that. And there's two types of tests, basically. There's the sociable test and the solitary test. Sound familiar? It's that same polarity again, right? And it depends which one, well, I'm a consultant, it depends. So it depends which one you pick. Sociable often test unit relying on other units to fulfill its behavior, and solitary tests, some unit testers prefer to isolate the tested unit. Okay, but how do we actually choose now? Right, is the question. The key here is you need both. But we're lacking one thing, and I lacked one thing 14 years ago, and that's what Evelyn already mentioned in Drive. There's this word called purpose. And that's the key here. If I know the purpose, it's better for me to understand which one of these two tests I can use. Right? So the potential of autonomy is only realized when guided by a clear purpose. And this is what domain-driven design actually is in a nutshell. Right? Recognizing and deeply understanding the needs of the user, so the user needs, and that drives designing a model for a specific purpose. As long as my unit test show me that that thing is working, that model is working, it doesn't matter which one I used, as long as I get the feel that that's working. And so I need them both. Sometimes I will start with this more social test that are more the acceptance test, that will test whatever the model needs to solve. And I might go deeper because I need more deeper things. And that's how you could use this map, right? If I look at the solitary test, there are good things, there's tests in isolation, there's fast feedback on failure, but they can cascade changes on mocks and stops if you go down, right? If this thing works. No, it's over there. Yeah, so cascading changes on mocks and stops is the downside of solitary tests. And loss of unit of work cohesiveness. A unit of work is not a class, it's a unit of work. So that's the downside of that. But then if we go to sociable tests, they're very much coherent. Testing the whole unit, you might potentially not need any no mocking or coupling there, but there's failure of bugs in other class and slower feedback on failure. You need them both. And the thing is, what's the purpose here? What I want to achieve is feeling secure to change the code. And as you can see, I need them both, and the map will help you identify, and this is the first step to the map, right? Finding the positives and the negatives as a team or as a person, and then find out when are we gonna switch, and that will be in the next section. So, that's a little bit about the code. That's a little bit of warm-up to this whole polarity thinking of autonomy. But how does that actually work in teams, Evelyn?
Oh, nice.
Nice.
Nice bridge.
I'm a wannabe, you know.
Sorry. So yeah, within teams, right? And this was a very interesting topic and also an interesting concept to discuss when you have all these different perspectives. Because autonomy really is about the self, right? And then you have a team, and there's no I in team. So how does that work? Because a team is just a collection of individuals, autonomous individuals maybe, and you also want to have an autonomous team, maybe. So how does that work? And as a social scientist, this is very interesting stuff. What makes it even more complex is that we are herd animals. And we really need to belong to a group. We need to have this sense of belonging. We need to be liked by others. We need to get confirmation from others. And when people say that they don't need that, or they don't need to be liked or get confirmed or belong, then I wouldn't believe them. But this is how we work. We want to be part of something bigger. We want to be part of a team. So whenever we are this group of individuals that also have this drive or this urge to be autonomous, then that might lead to all sorts of complications and things that we might want to deal with in a team. So for example, when I'm in a part of a team and I have this brilliant idea, whatever it may be, and you may agree or not, but maybe I go on some sort of a solo adventure and just start something and then explain it or inform the rest of my team later. And the team at that point might think, what is she doing and why does she think this makes sense and this works and we need this? And I might have the feeling that I get rejected by the rest of the team. Rejection is one of the worst things that you can do to a herd animal. So this means that within a team that you need to define what autonomy means on an individual level, on a team level, how we interact with each other, how we collaborate, what we accept from each other, what we don't accept, the decision-making structures, the level of autonomy or power, or the way in which you can go on your solo adventures. You need to define everything, because if you don't do that, then you can get into all sorts of messy situations, which you don't want. And this is a story, this is an example of when things got messy. And this is really a story about a team where autonomy wasn't really defined in a proper way, and things got towards extreme autonomy, let's say, and maybe even dictatorship. And I'm aware that dictatorship is also a container concept and full of judgment and interpretation, but it serves a purpose in this story. So I was working in a team, and this team was, doing okay-ish, but they had this pattern. And every time when the end of a sprint came near, the team kind of got paralyzed, because there was a fear of decision-making, there was a fear of being held accountable for stuff, there was a fear of making mistakes. And at the end of a sprint, they were all like, okay, we'll just sit this one out, we'll wait till the next sprint starts, and then we can continue again. There was one person in this team who was also the lead developer, coincidentally, and he got triggered and annoyed every time the end of a sprint came near, because he saw this pattern going on, and he was like, okay, something needs to be done, I will just grab the steering wheel, and I will do anything, make the decisions, and we'll make sure that something is being delivered. And his behavior was a consequence of this whole autonomy thing not being defined, there were no boundaries, there were no shared understanding, no shared meaning of what it meant. So he did that every time the sprint ended. This had an effect on the team, the rest of the team, and it was twofold, which was very interesting, because at one hand, the team was like, why is this person thinking he can make all of the decisions and doing everything and just acting as a dictator? This was their words, not mine. At the same time, they really liked it because this person was taking all the bullets. Because when the hard conversations were needed, and when hard conversations needed to happen with management or stuff was going wrong, he was taking the bullets and the rest of the team was just sitting it out. So again, this whole autonomy thing exists within boundaries and within a specific context. And this is really where they have, if they have had autonomy defined properly, then also this power and decision-making level and decision-making structure would have been more clear. So here in this example, autonomy is kind of being misused or used as power. And that's, not what you want, apparently, because, the dictatorship didn't really help the team in the delivery. But this whole example can also have an effect on engineers, right?
Yes.
Another
that was
effect.
The bridge, right?
Another effect, yes.
So once you see these polarities popping, right, autonomy and alignment, or both sides, you start seeing it popping up, and especially in this social setting, right, when that's not discussed, what you will see happening is that these problem spaces pop up. This is from a low-code conference I got from a colleague, and he says, application team grows, delivery slows down because multiple developers compete to change the same code. Who think that's a bad thing? Yeah, it might be a bad thing. But then their solution here is developers need to deliver at different paces and release teams to control what is delivered. That's autonomy for you. Yes, definitely. The problem here is that they're a team. If they work on the same code and they're changing the same code and they're in each other's way, that's good. Maybe they should start talking to each other, right? And maybe they should do the work together. And that's really both sides. And what you see is due to all these social things that Evelyn says, and this is a theory, developers like to live on branches because they're isolated, it's about them, there's no social stuff going on there, they can just do what they're good at. There's no risk, right? If I expose my code to the outside world, I can get feedback. And maybe I can get that dictator that's trashing me. That safety will push people towards more autonomy and more individuating on branches. The problem here is that that branch is no real feedback, because as you can see, on the same time on the main line, something different happened. So there's feedback, but very late feedback. And that's a problem. So if we go back to the map and we see like branching gives you freedom, it gives you individual creativity, however, there's loss of cohesive mental model. Right? Because we're all on the branch, and at some point there will be a PR. We'll review the PR and think, really, did you do that? And now sunk cost fallacy comes in, meaning, oh, let's do a quick fix and let's push it to production. Who recognizes this pattern? Yeah, a lot. So if you noticed, and this is the thing in a polarity map, right? There are some signals and observation. If people noticed competing to change the same code, if they're on the branch, then maybe you should go to the other side. And this is what you can discuss and make visible, right, in that polarity. You can say, okay, if we compete to change the same code, then maybe we should start pairing together and solve it together, because maybe there's some model disparity. And then we can go to trunk-based, which is shared mental model in code. It's a team effort. We care for the whole. The problem that can happen in a trunk-based development environment is excessive conformity. And we need to watch that, and we need to get a signal to that. So that's a little bit how that polarity map happens. And the goal here, of course, is to be always in a releasable state. That's continuous integration. Always be in a releasable state. And also, if we go down, we get bugs. Right? So that's a little bit about autonomy in the teams. Let's switch to autonomy between teams. And in comes a little bit of team topology, right? We talked a lot about today about team first. So stream-aligned teams are long-lived stewardship, solving needs and purposes. So this is a good thing. We want to have team first. But let's say we switch these teams into stream-aligned teams, and we had Rich talk about a little bit about this user needs mapping, and we can say, okay, we have on the left side, we have like the home delivery ordering team, right? And they're doing home deliveries. Then on the right side, we might have the fulfillment team. And great, they both have the same takeout customer, and they are building systems for them. Now, what happens when there's a new thing popping up? And in this case, it's an estimate time before ordering food or during ordering. Where does that sit? Now, if your teams stay isolated, so you just switched your teams to the team topology, which I see a lot of organizations doing, okay, let's just put them stream-aligned, but you haven't done anything about this polarity, they will just turn, and this was a question I've heard today, aren't they just being isolated again? Yes, because team topology is also about the interaction between the teams, and you need to make sure that they can interact. And what we do most of the time then is, what do we actually do with these architects? Oh, maybe they can help align these teams, right? And they can form an architectural enablement team. And now they run for a long time. And that's not what you want. Because what happens, usually what I see in organization is that these stream-aligned teams are designed to be granted with autonomy, then criticized for lacking that organizational context because they're isolated. And that's actually a very convenient way for architecture, for management, for hierarchical control. And Trond talked a lot about that today, right? This is the in-between state between hierarchy and real democracy. So we get this enabling team, and what happens usually with the enablement teams, they get a lot of context and a lot of the wholeness of the organization, and they turn into blockers to flow again. Because the teams are really building for their customer, solutions for their customer only, but they don't know the entirety of the organization anymore. So they always turn to the architects to, please give me some context. And that's not what we want. That's that same autonomous pattern again, right? So John Kotler has this nice view of team boundaries. If you haven't seen it before, it's very interesting. So first you had Agile that created build and test teams. Then we moved to DevOps that could release and run, maybe do a little bit design, and we went lower. But we never went, what I see organizations don't do is go further. Have teams, have product teams that can actually take opportunities in from the organization and build that out. So if you turn into 1 and 2 Agile and DevOps teams, turn them into stream-aligned teams. They're not really stream-aligned because they're still only feature factories. There's still people, hierarchies around them that says, well, they don't know anything about the organization. We'll design it, we'll impose the design on top of them, and they will build it. They will that will turn into isolated teams again, and then what's next? In 2 years, people will say, team topology doesn't work because you haven't seen these social dynamics. So a little bit of product placement. We think that the next stage, what we need to do is more collaborative software design. Team topology does team interaction modeling, for instance, but you have event storming, you have user needs mapping, you have domain message flow modeling, domain storytelling. All these architectural things is what we should be doing, and that's called collaborative modeling. We wrote a book about it with Gien, and it's actually a visualization technique to analyze these complex and conflicting decision-making things. And this is the key to move to teams that will self-organize, right? And that means that as an architect, yes, start to enable to find out what do these teams need. It's a different way. So you go to the teams. So I've seen most architects go to the team and say, hey, I have my Archimate, here, use it. Teams will not use it. So what would they use, and how can you collaborate with them to find out which collaborative tool would they use and would they change, right? So we need to move to an architecture as a platform team there, giving them the context as a service. Yeah? And what we also should do is learn them these techniques. And that's a real enablement team, right? It's to lower their intrinsic load. So as an architectural enablement team, these are some of the things: facilitating software architecture, learning system thinking, and that's the same that DevOps did, right? Learning teams to do operational work, and this will learn teams to do more of architecture, system thinking, etc., etc. Yeah. So, and the great book about Andrew is about facilitating software architecture. We need to teach them to do decentralized decision making and create sort of like a base structure for them to share and be transparent. So, because what happens if a team stays on one side in that isolation, and here's the polarity map again, if they stay on one side, teams will get both sides negativity. So first they get in isolation, loss of equality, and they become selfish, but eventually they get high cognitive load because they now also don't know and understand what the rest of the organization is happening. And we want to give them agency. So, that's a little bit of autonomy between teams. Let's move on to the next one.
Yeah, autonomy in organization.
You didn't stand up this morning with self-organization, right?
No.
So you're going to talk a little bit about that.
Unfortunately. Yeah, but autonomy in organization. So we wanted to include this level in this talk too, but it sounds intense, right? And it is. But autonomy in organizations for us is really about where leadership can shine. And not just the formal, explicit hierarchy leadership, but this is also where the more informal leaders, because even if you have a very flat organization, there's always a hierarchy, there's always ranking, so there's always leadership. But when it comes to autonomy in organizations, it's where leadership should shine and where they have a great responsibility. Because autonomy, if you have all this autonomy in an organization, then it needs to be coordinated in a way. It needs to be defined in a way. It needs to be given boundaries in a way. So there's a constant negotiation going on of what autonomy means in all of your different contexts and on all of the different levels that you have in your organization. It's not something you define once and then we're done, go. That's not how it works. So it's a constant negotiation, and this is really where leadership can play an important role. So in a lot of organizations where we are, we hear people asking for a compelling vision. Please, leadership, give us a compelling vision, mission, strategy, give it to us. We need it in order for us to do our jobs. And from experience, what we find is that whenever there is a call for a vision, it's usually a call for boundaries. Please, leadership, tell us where the boundaries are in which we can act, and then we will figure it out from there. So that's what you need to do, and where your responsibility is as a leader, we think, to create this compelling vision, but at least it should contain these boundaries in which the autonomy can exist. And from there, if you have that, then it still cascades down to all of the levels and context that you have in your organization. So there still is a continuous negotiation going on what it means in terms of all the different stuff, because autonomy means different things in every context, and you as a leader should be able to coordinate everything that's happening in these different contexts. And that's a real challenge. That's a really tough thing to do. It also comes with a question, so who calls the shots now? If we have this autonomy everywhere in our organization, then what does that mean for my level of power and my decision-making structures? And yes, autonomy does something with your decision-making structure, obviously. It also does something with the level of power that you may have. But this question, who calls the shots now, is a really interesting one, because the question behind this question is what you would want to know. If this is a question just coming from, hey, we haven't really figured it out, the decision-making structure is not clear, there's still some ambiguity, we need to figure it out, fine, you have a conversation to have. But the question behind this question can also be, hey, am I going to lose some of the power that I used to have? And whenever we feel like something might be taken away from us as humans, that's when we might get to engage in some tricky behavior. Because if we might feel something might be taken away from us, we're going to do everything we can to keep it. And you can imagine what type of behavior that can lead to, and it doesn't necessarily need to match with your vision of autonomy organization. Another question that might be a signal that you should be going back to your conversations is this one. And this one is actually one that I heard in an organization. We gave them autonomy, why aren't they doing anything with it? Yeah, that was, I was in shock. So I was quiet for a few seconds when this question was being asked. So first of all, we gave them autonomy. So from the goodness of your heart, you gave them something that don't necessarily align with what you want, but you gave it to them, and now you expected them to do something with it. So apparently there's a gap in what you expected and what you're seeing. So that is a gap that you first need to address. This also has a lot to do with power and the feeling of losing power, and there was a lot behind these questions that I can't be going in now because we only have 5 minutes left. And we cannot go over time. But as a leader, this is really where you should pay attention. If questions like this are being asked in your organization, or if you're asking these questions yourself, these are signals that you need to do something, that there is a conversation needed around the boundaries of autonomy within your organization. So what does that mean for managers and architects?
Yeah, I think we heard that in the morning, right?
Yeah.
I think management, we need leaderships in teams, right?
Yeah.
But one thing Trond mentioned today in his talk is never ever impose design. If you're gonna use this switch, you need to do it with the teams, yeah? And then all these social dynamics start popping up. And once you transition to this state of more self-organization, you will really want to look at when should we still take decentralized decision? When can we do that? That's a good focus. But when should we still take centralized decision, right? Because both have downsides. Like decentralized decision is organizational, cannot coordinate, FOMO, etc., etc. Both have blockers to flow. The centralized decision is queuing and wait time. So look at these signals and observations in your organization, and these are contextual, right? The middle is usually similar to most organizations in the polarity map, but the signals and observation is what you want to look out for. Because intentionally what you want is agency-enabled teams that will interact with each other, and I think that's mentioned multiple times today.
And I think these two questions that were just in there are very strong signals that you need to dive back into your polarity map.
So, one thing to also notice, these patterns of autonomy and isolation are fractal. If you find them on management, you'll find them in the code probably, in a similar way. If the management is isolated, then probably your code is also more, and you're doing more flow branching, because these are fractal. These are fractal patterns that keep coming back, right? So, to wrap up, because I think people are getting thirsty.
You saw the sign, right?
I saw the sign.
You need to stop.
Is autonomy what we really want? Well, what we define what we want is define and negotiate boundaries continuously. We want to manage these polarities with polarity management. That's not the only thing you should do, but that's one of the things to look out for. And this polarity that keeps, it's a problem that you cannot solve, but manage. And if all else fails, we already have some bossabolle today. These were the chocolate things. It's very nice. So if all else fails, you can also sit back at home, eat some bossabolle, and cry. That's what I would do.
That's what I would do.
Yeah. And one thing to really wrap it up, the paradox of autonomy. Autonomy empowers individuals and teams, yet it risks us, and this is what's happening in the world right now, is fractioning us into us versus them. That's the paradox, and especially in the West, we're very individuating in that polarity, right? Each organization in each culture is moving to one of these autonomies usually. We don't want to allow this polarity to define us, especially as we pursue fast flow. So please, let's reshape that narrative. Celebrate these differences. It's great. I'm here in Brabant, which is different from Amsterdam. Yeah? And I celebrate that because they do carnival. It's very good. We don't have that, unfortunately. So I celebrate that, cherish that equality, and intentionally build us and them, and actively seek our shared needs. Because even though you're on opposite sides, there usually are shared needs, and you can find something in the other. And with that, we want to wrap up. And one final word, leave the judging to the cats, because they're very, very good at it. And if you want to get the book, that's it. My name was Kenny Baas-Vegler. I'm also a team topology valued practitioner and a domain-driven design expert.
En Evelyn.
En Evelyn.
Een Brabander.
Brabander. Thank you.